My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I sat there in the parking lot of First National Bank, staring at a credit card statement that made absolutely no sense. $47,000 in charges, restaurants I'd never been to, hotels, in cities I'd never visited. Shopping sprees that happened while I was home cooking dinner for my husband of 28 years. The paper felt heavy in my hands, like it was made of lead instead of ordinary bank statements. My name was Diane Williams. I was 62 years old. I'd been married to Robert Williams since I was 34, and I thought I knew everything about him. His coffee had to be black, no sugar. He snored when he slept on his left side. He called me sweetheart every morning before leaving for work at the insurance company. But this credit card statement, it belonged to a stranger. I'd found it that morning buried under a stack of Robert's work papers that he'd left on the kitchen counter. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the bank had mixed up our account with someone else's. These things happen, right? But there it was, clear as day. Robert Williams, our home address, account opened 3 years ago. 3 years. How do you hide a credit card from your wife for 3 years? My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my ribs. I kept reading the same charges over and over, hoping they'd somehow change. Tiffany and Company, $1,500. The Ritz-Carlton, Portland, 8 nights, $3,200. Victoria's Secret, $467. Victoria's Secret. I hadn't shopped there in 20 years. The worst part wasn't even the money though. $47,000 was more than we'd ever spent on a vacation together. The worst part was realizing that while I was at home organizing our tax documents and planning our retirement, my husband was living a completely different life. A life that cost more in 3 years than we'd saved for our golden years. I picked up my phone to call him, then put it down again. What would I even say? Hey honey, I found your secret credit card. Want to explain why you've been spending my retirement fund on lingerie for someone who isn't me? The bank's automatic doors slid open, and I watched other couples walking in and out together. Normal couples. Couples who probably didn't have secret credit cards or mysterious charges, or husbands who disappeared for work conferences every month like clockwork. That's when it hit me. Those monthly trips to Portland, the regional meetings that always seemed to fall on weekends. The way he'd gotten so protective of his phone lately, taking it with him, even to the bathroom. I thought the worst thing my husband could hide from me was an affair. I was wrong. Some secrets destroy more than just trust. They destroy your entire identity. Everything you thought you knew about the person sleeping next to you for nearly 3 decades. I grabbed the door handle and stepped out of the car. It was time to find out exactly who I'd been married to all these years. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. To understand how devastating this discovery was, you need to know what my life looked like before that credit card statement turned my world upside down. For 28 years, I believed I was living the American dream with my husband, Robert. We met when I was 32, working as a receptionist at a medical clinic in Ohio. Robert was this charming insurance adjuster who came in to handle a claim, and he made me laugh so hard I snorted coffee through my nose. He thought it was adorable instead of embarrassing. 3 months later, he proposed with a modest diamond ring and a promise that he'd spend the rest of his life making me laugh. And he did. At least, I thought he did. Robert was the kind of husband other women envied. He never forgot our anniversary, always brought me flowers on random Tuesdays just because he saw them at the grocery store. When I got food poisoning from that sketchy seafood place, he sat by my bed for 2 days, bringing me ice chips and watching terrible romantic comedies, without complaining once. Mom, you two are disgustingly perfect together. Our daughter Melissa used to say, rolling her eyes whenever she caught us slow dancing in the kitchen while dinner was cooking. It's like watching a Hallmark movie except Dad actually does the dishes. Afterward, Robert called me his financial wizard because I managed every aspect of our money. I balanced the checkbook, paid the bills, organized our tax documents, and tracked every penny we spent. He'd joke with his coworkers, saying, "Diane knows where every dollar goes before I even earn it. She's got spreadsheets for our spreadsheets." I loved being needed that way. I loved that he trusted me completely with our finances, that he'd hand me his paycheck every 2 weeks and say, "Work your magic, sweetheart." I kept detailed records of everything: our mortgage payments, car insurance, even how much we spent on groceries each month. I had manila folders labeled for every aspect of our financial life, color-coded and out. When Robert's job required us to move from Ohio to Michigan, then to Illinois, I never hesitated. I packed up our life, found new doctors, new grocery stores, new neighbors. I made our house a home in every city, hanging the same family photos, arranging the furniture the same way, creating stability for Melissa no matter where Robert's career took us. I knew everything about this man. He had a scar on his left shoulder from falling off his bike when he was 8. He was terrified of spiders but pretended to be brave when I needed him to kill one. He cried during every Disney movie, especially the ones where the parent dies. He wore the same cologne for 15 years because I mentioned once that I liked it. I could predict his moods, his needs, his reactions. When he came home stressed from work, I'd have his favorite pot roast ready and a cold beer waiting. When he couldn't sleep, I'd rub his back until he relaxed. When his mother died 5 years ago, I held him while he sobbed like a child, and I handled every detail of the funeral because he was too broken to think straight. Our friends called us couple goals. We finished each other's sentences, shared inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else, and after nearly 3 decades together, we still held hands during movies. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. I thought I knew my husband's heart, his dreams, his fears, even his social security number by memory. I was so completely, devastatingly wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I first noticed something wasn't right. I was in Robert's home office organizing our tax documents like I did every year. Robert was meticulous about keeping receipts, but he had this habit of shoving everything into desk drawers and leaving me to sort through the chaos. I was pulling papers from his bottom drawer when I found it, a credit card statement from Pacific Trust Bank. I'd never heard of Pacific Trust Bank in my life, and I knew every financial institution we'd ever dealt with. After 28 years of managing our money, I could recite our account numbers, our credit limits, even the customer service phone numbers by heart. The statement was addressed to Robert Williams at our home address, but it wasn't our usual Visa or MasterCard. The account number was completely foreign to me, and there were charges on it dating back 6 months. Nothing huge. A dinner here, gas station purchases there, a hotel charge for $89, but every single transaction was a mystery to me. My heart started beating faster as I flipped through the pages. According to this statement, Robert had spent over $3,000 on things I'd never seen, places we'd never been together. There was a charge for Nordstrom in downtown Portland, but Robert had never mentioned shopping there during his business trips. A restaurant called La Bernardine that cost $240 for one meal that I definitely hadn't eaten with him. I sat there in his leather desk chair, holding this piece of paper like it might bite me. In all our years together, Robert and I had been completely transparent about money. We had joint accounts, joint credit cards, joint everything. We'd never hidden purchases from each other, never had secret spending money. The most secretive Robert had ever been was when he bought my birthday presents, and even then, he'd asked me to look away when he paid the credit card bill so I wouldn't see the surprise. When Robert came home from work that evening, I was in the kitchen making his favorite meatloaf. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say about 50 times, trying to find a way to bring it up that didn't sound accusatory. I mean, there had to be a reasonable explanation, right? "Honey," I said, keeping my voice casual as I set his plate down, "I found something interesting while organizing the tax stuff today." "Oh yeah, find some receipts I forgot about." He was already cutting into his meatloaf, not really paying attention. I placed the Pacific Trust Bank statement next to his plate. This credit card statement. I don't recognize this account. Robert glanced down at it, and for just a split second, maybe half a second, his face changed. Not panic exactly, but something flickered across his expression. Then he smiled, that warm, reassuring smile I knew so well. "Oh, that old thing," he said, waving his fork dismissively. "That's just a business card for work expenses. The company wanted us to separate business purchases from personal ones for tax purposes. Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart." His explanation sounded reasonable. It even made sense from a business perspective. But something about the way he said, "nothing you need to worry about," felt different. In 28 years, Robert had never excluded me from financial conversations. Even boring work expense reports were something we'd discussed together. "But some of these charges look personal," I said gently. "Like this restaurant bill." "Diane, honey," Robert interrupted, reaching over to squeeze my hand. His voice was loving but firm. "I handle client dinners sometimes. You know how it is with insurance work. You wine and dine the big accounts." He folded the statement and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "I'll take care of filing this with the business stuff. Don't clutter up your beautiful organized system with my boring work paperwork." He kissed my forehead and went back to eating, changing the subject to Melissa's upcoming wedding plans. But I noticed he kept his shirt pocket turned away from me for the rest of the evening. That night, lying in bed next to my husband of 28 years, I stared at the ceiling and wondered why I felt like I'd just been lied to by someone I trusted completely. After that first credit card statement, I started noticing things I'd somehow missed before. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small shifts in our routine that felt like tiny paper cuts, barely noticeable until they started adding up. The mail became Robert's territory overnight. For 28 years, I'd always brought in the mail, sorted it on the kitchen counter, and handled anything that needed attention. But suddenly, Robert was racing to the mailbox every afternoon, sometimes even leaving work early to beat me home. When I asked about it, he'd laugh and say, "Just trying to be more helpful around here, sweetheart. You do everything else." But I noticed he'd flip through the envelopes quickly, sliding certain pieces into his jacket pocket before I could see them. When I mentioned that we'd gotten something from American Express, a company we'd never had an account with, Robert would wave it off. Probably just promotional junk. You know how they send credit card offers to everyone. Except it didn't look like promotional junk. It looked like statements. 3 weeks later, another mysterious envelope arrived from Chase Bank. I happened to answer the door when the mailman came, and I saw Robert's name on what was clearly an account statement. This time, when I brought it up, Robert's tone shifted. "Diane, why are you going through my mail?" he asked, not looking up from his newspaper. "Some of this stuff is work-related, and frankly, it's confidential. My boss wouldn't appreciate you reading through insurance documents." Work-related, everything was work-related. Now, when our neighbor Carol mentioned that she'd seen Robert at an expensive steakhouse downtown on a Thursday night, a night he told me he was working late, Robert had a ready explanation. "Big client meeting," he said, but his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "Carol must be confused about what night she saw me. You know how unreliable her memory is since her husband died." That stung. Carol's husband had passed away 2 years earlier, and she'd been struggling with grief, not memory problems. Robert had always been kind about Carol's situation before. This casual cruelty felt like meeting a stranger. The most painful change was how he started treating me during financial conversations. For nearly 3 decades, Robert had called me his financial wizard, praising my attention to detail and organizational skills. But when I suggested we meet with a financial advisor to plan for retirement, something we'd talked about doing for years, Robert's response was dismissive. "Let me handle the money stuff, Diane. You've got enough to worry about with the house and Melissa's wedding planning." He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. "Besides, you wouldn't understand the investment strategies we'd need for someone in my income bracket." My income bracket. When had our money become his money? When I tried to bring up our retirement savings account, Robert cut me off entirely. Diane, I appreciate that you want to help, but financial planning is more complicated than balancing a checkbook. Maybe stick to what you know best, keeping the house running and supporting the family. Supporting the family, as if managing every aspect of our domestic life for 28 years hadn't been supporting the family. As if the money I'd saved through careful budgeting hadn't helped build whatever mysterious investments he was now protecting from me. The worst part wasn't just feeling excluded, it was feeling like I was losing my mind. Every time I questioned something, Robert had a logical explanation. Every time I felt hurt by his dismissive tone, he'd follow it up with, "I love you, sweetheart," and a kiss on the forehead, making me feel guilty for doubting him. I started second-guessing myself constantly. Was I being paranoid? Was I imagining the change in his behavior? When your partner of 28 years starts treating you like you're not smart enough to understand your own financial situation, you begin to wonder if maybe you're not. But deep down, in a place I tried to ignore, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The man who used to ask my opinion on everything was now acting like my input was not just unwanted, it was inappropriate. I was being slowly erased from my own life, one dismissive conversation at a time. The humiliation came on a Wednesday afternoon at Central Community Bank, where Robert and I had banked for 15 years. I'd gone there with what I thought was a simple request, adding myself as an authorized user to Robert's business credit card so I could help manage his work expenses during tax season. I dressed nicely for the occasion, wearing my navy blue blazer and the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. I wanted to look professional, capable. After weeks of feeling dismissed and excluded from our financial decisions, I thought this would be a way to prove I could still be helpful, still be the financial wizard Robert used to say he married. The bank was busy that afternoon. The line stretched back to the front door, filled with people on their lunch breaks trying to handle their banking before returning to work. I waited patiently for 20 minutes, practicing what I'd say to the teller. I had Robert's account information written neatly on a piece of paper, along with my driver's license and social security card. When I finally reached the counter, I was greeted by Janet, a teller I'd known for years. She'd handled our mortgage paperwork and had always been friendly and efficient. "Hi Diane, what can I help you with today?" Janet asked with her usual bright smile. "I'd like to add myself as an authorized user to my husband's business credit card account," I said, sliding the paper with Robert's information across the counter along with my identification. Janet's fingers flew across her keyboard, but after a few moments, her expression changed from professional efficiency to confusion. She frowned at her screen, typed something else, then looked up at me with uncertainty. "I'm sorry, Diane, but I'm not seeing any credit card account under Robert Williams that matches this information. Are you sure these are the correct account details?" My cheeks started to burn. Behind me, I could hear the impatient shuffling of feet from other customers waiting in line, a businessman checking his watch, a mother with 2 small children trying to keep them quiet, all of them witnessing my confusion. "That's impossible," I said, my voice coming out higher than intended. "This is definitely his account information. Maybe try his social security number instead." I rattled off Robert's social security number, the number I knew as well as my own, the number I'd written on countless tax forms and insurance applications over the years. Janet typed it in, her expression growing more apologetic by the second. "Ma'am, I'm showing Robert Williams in our system for your joint checking and savings accounts, but there's no credit card account associated with this social security number. Are you certain this card is through Central Community Bank?" The AI paper in my hand suddenly felt like evidence of my own stupidity. I stared at the account information I'd copied so carefully from that Pacific Trust Bank statement, realizing I'd somehow convinced myself it was from our regular bank. The account number, the bank routing information, none of it belonged to Central Community. "Oh," I said quietly, feeling my face flush deeper. "I think I may have gotten confused about which bank this account is with." Janet tried to be kind, That happens sometimes. Different banks, different account numbers. It can be confusing to keep track of everything. But her sympathy only made it worse. I could feel the eyes of everyone behind me witnessing a 62-year-old woman who apparently didn't know where her own husband banked, a wife who didn't understand her own family's financial accounts. Would you like me to print out your current account information instead? Janet offered gently. No, thank you, I whispered, gathering my papers with shaking hands. I'll figure this out at home. I walked out of that bank, feeling smaller than I'd felt in years. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and called Robert's office, Meridian Insurance. This is Robert Williams. Robert, it's me. I just tried to add myself to your business credit card at Central Community, but they said you don't have an account there. Which bank is your business card through? There was a pause, a long pause that made my stomach clench. Diane, why were you at the bank trying to access my business accounts? We talked about this. Those are work-related financial matters that don't concern you. I just wanted to help with. I'll handle my own business banking. Thank you. I have to go. I'm in a meeting. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there in the bank parking lot, surrounded by people going about their normal banking business, realizing I didn't know my own husband's complete financial picture. After 28 years of marriage, I just publicly demonstrated that I was a stranger to half of Robert's financial life. The worst part wasn't the embarrassment. It was the growing certainty that this wasn't confusion on my part. This was deliberate exclusion on his. That evening, I waited for Robert to come home with a knot in my stomach that felt like I'd swallowed concrete. I'd spent the afternoon replaying the bank incident over and over, trying to understand how I'd become so disconnected from our financial life. By the time I heard his car in the driveway, I'd worked up the courage to demand real answers. Robert walked through the front door at 6:47 p.m., same as always, loosening his tie and calling out his usual, "Honey, I'm home." But when he saw me sitting at the kitchen table with a manila folder full of the mysterious mail pieces I'd managed to collect over the past few weeks, his expression hardened. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice already defensive. "This is us having an honest conversation about what's going on with our finances," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Robert, I found statements from 3 different banks we've never discussed. There are credit cards I don't know about, accounts with my name nowhere on them. After 28 years of managing our money together, I feel like I don't know anything about our financial situation." Robert set down his briefcase with more force than necessary. "Diane, we've been through this. Those are business accounts, work expenses. Insurance regulations require—" "Stop," I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Just stop with the business account story. I called Pacific Trust Bank today. They told me this account has personal charges going back 3 years. Restaurants, hotels, shopping. None of it looks like business expenses to me." Robert's jaw tightened. He walked to the refrigerator, grabbed a beer, and took a long drink before turning back to me. When he spoke, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Why are you snooping around my business, Diane? Why are you calling banks and embarrassing yourself at Central Community, trying to access accounts that have nothing to do with you, nothing to do with me?" I stood up, feeling my legs shake. "Robert, I'm your wife. We're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to share everything." "Partners," Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Diane, I work 60 hours a week to provide for this family. I've supported you for 28 years, given you a comfortable life, a beautiful home, everything you could want. And this is how you repay me, by questioning every decision I make, by going behind my back to banks, by treating me like some kind of criminal." His words hit me like physical blows. "I'm not treating you like a criminal. I'm trying to understand why my husband has been hiding financial accounts from me for years." "Hiding?" Robert's voice rose. "I'm not hiding anything. I'm protecting this family's financial stability by making smart business decisions that you couldn't possibly understand. You balance a checkbook, Diane. You clip coupons and organize receipts. That doesn't make you qualified to understand complex financial strategies." The dismissiveness in his tone was devastating. But it was the look in his eyes that broke something. Inside me, he was looking at me like I was a stranger, like I was an annoyance he had to tolerate. "Robert, I've managed our household finances for 28 years. I've saved us thousands of dollars, kept us out of debt, organized every aspect of our financial life, and I appreciate that," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But there's a difference between household management and real financial planning. Maybe you should stick to what you're good at, and let me handle the complex stuff." Stared at this man I'd loved for nearly 3 decades, feeling like I was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I'm the man who's been carrying this family financially while you play house," Robert snapped. "And frankly, I'm tired of being questioned and second-guessed every time I try to secure our future." He grabbed his beer and headed toward the stairs. "I'm going to my office. Maybe when I come back down, you'll remember that I work hard to take care of you, and a little gratitude wouldn't be out of place." I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, then heard his office door slam. I sat back down at the kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of accounts I didn't understand, in a house that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. For the first time in 28 years, I wondered if the man I'd married had ever really existed at all. 3 days later, Robert packed a suitcase and left, saying he needed space to think about our relationship. He didn't say where he was going or when he'd be back. I spent those 3 days alone in our house, questioning everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and myself. The silence in our house was deafening. For 3 days, I wandered through rooms that felt like a museum of a life I wasn't sure had ever been real. Every corner held memories that now felt contaminated. The kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals together. The living room couch where we'd watched movies every Friday night for 28 years. The bedroom where we'd whispered plans for our future, our retirement, our golden years together. I couldn't eat. Food tasted like cardboard, and my stomach felt too knotted to hold anything down. Anyway, I'd lost 8 pounds in 3 days, and my clothes hung loose on my frame. When I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the hollow-eyed woman staring back at me. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie in our king-size bed, which suddenly felt enormous and cold, staring at Robert's empty pillow and replaying every conversation we'd had over the past few months, every dismissive comment, every mysterious phone call, every time he'd intercepted the mail. How had I been so blind? How had I lived with someone for 28 years and not seen who he really was? On the second night, I found myself sitting on the floor of our walk-in closet, surrounded by photo albums I'd pulled from the storage boxes. Wedding photos, vacation pictures, birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings, 28 years of what I'd thought was a beautiful love story spread out around me like evidence at a crime scene. In one photo, Robert was feeding me wedding cake, both of us laughing as frosting smeared across my chin. In another, we were standing in front of the Grand Canyon during our 10th anniversary trip, his arm around my waist, both of us squinting into the sun with genuine smiles. There was the picture from Melissa's college graduation, the three of us beaming with pride. Had any of it been real? Had Robert been pretending for 3 decades? Was I really that naive, that easy to fool? I picked up our wedding photo, the formal portrait where we were gazing into each other's eyes like we were the only two people in the world. I'd loved that photo for 28 years. I dusted the frame every week, straightened it when it got crooked, and shown it proudly to visitors. Now, looking at Robert's face in that picture, I wondered if he'd already been planning his other life even then. My sister Carol called on the 3rd day, and when I heard her voice, I completely fell apart. "Diane, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" "I don't know who I married, Carol," I sobbed into the phone, still sitting among the scattered photos. "I don't know if anything about our life together was true. What if our entire marriage has been fake? What if I've been living a lie for 28 years? Honey, slow down. What happened? Where's Robert?" "He left. He said he needed space to think. But Carol, I found things. Bank statements, credit cards, accounts I've never seen before, money disappearing for years. And when I asked about it, he made me feel like I was crazy for even questioning him. My voice cracked completely. He called me stupid. Carol, he said I couldn't understand complex financial matters. After 28 years of managing every penny we've spent, he made me feel like I was some helpless child who couldn't balance a checkbook. Carol was quiet for a long moment. Oh, sweetheart, I keep thinking about all the signs I must have missed, all the times he traveled for work, all the mysterious phone calls, all the mail he started hiding from me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have lived with someone for almost 30 years and not really know them at all? I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. What if I wasted my entire adult life on someone who was never really mine? What if everything I thought we built together was just him tolerating me while he lived his real life somewhere else? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the self-doubt. I'd started questioning every instinct I'd ever had, every decision I'd made, every moment of happiness I'd felt. If I could be so wrong about the person I slept next to every night for 28 years, what else was I wrong about? That night, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the scattered pieces of what I'd thought was my life, and wondered if I'd ever be able to trust my own judgment again. I felt like I was drowning in a life that had turned out to be built on lies, and I didn't know how to find solid ground anymore. On the fourth day of Robert's absence, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. Maybe it was exhaustion from 3 sleepless nights, or maybe it was the simple fact that I'd cried out every tear in my body, but something had shifted. I was tired of feeling helpless, tired of waiting for Robert to come home and explain away my reality again. I made myself toast, the first solid food I'd eaten in days, and walked purposefully to Robert's home office. If he wanted space to think, then I was going to use that space to find some answers. His desk was exactly as he'd left it, papers scattered across the surface, coffee cups still sitting there with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. I'd always respected his workspace, never snooping or moving his things. But respect was a luxury I could no longer afford. I started with the obvious places: desk drawers, filing cabinets, the stack of papers on his desk. Most of it was routine stuff, insurance forms, and client files. But then I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. A small metal filing cabinet tucked under his desk, partially hidden by his chair. I tried the drawers. The top 2 opened easily, filled with old tax returns and warranty information, but the bottom drawer was locked. In 28 years of marriage, Robert had never locked anything from me. We didn't even lock the bathroom door when we showered. The sight of that small silver lock felt like a personal insult. I searched through his desk drawers until I found a paperclip and spent 20 minutes working at the lock until I heard a satisfying click. My hands were shaking as I pulled the drawer open. The first thing I saw was a manila folder labeled Personal PC. Inside were copies of documents that made my blood run cold, bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, credit card applications with signatures that looked like Robert's handwriting, but with a different address in Portland, Oregon. But it was the insurance forms that made me sit down hard in Robert's chair. Life insurance beneficiary forms dated 6 months after our wedding. The primary beneficiary wasn't me. It was someone named Patricia Chen, listed as spouse. Patricia Chen, spouse, not ex-wife, not girlfriend, spouse. My vision started to blur as I flipped through more documents. A marriage certificate, not ours. Robert's name clearly printed next to Patricia Chen's, dated August 15, 1998. 2 years after we were married. I stared at that document for a full minute, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Robert had married someone else while married to me. Not an affair, another marriage, another wife. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and typed Patricia Chen, Portland, Oregon, into Google. The first result was a LinkedIn profile, Patricia Chen, 59, elementary school teacher at Westside Elementary in Portland. The profile photo showed a woman with kind eyes and graying hair smiling at the camera. I clicked on her Facebook page, which was thankfully public. The photos made my heart stop. There was Robert, my Robert, at what looked like a restaurant, his arm around Patricia, both of them wearing what appeared to be wedding rings. The photo was dated 3 months ago. I scrolled through more pictures. Robert and Patricia at a beach building sandcastles, with 2 young children who had her eyes, a photo of them in front of a Christmas tree, both wearing matching sweaters, a vacation photo from what looked like Hawaii, both of them tanned and laughing. The most recent photo was from Valentine's Day this year. Patricia had posted it with the caption, 27 years with my best friend and the love of my life. Here's to 27 more, my darling husband. 27 years. They'd been together for 27 years, which meant Robert had married her just 1 year after marrying me. I was scrolling through what looked like an entire parallel life. Birthday parties, anniversary dinners, family gatherings, all featuring my husband with another woman who clearly believed she was his only wife. There were no photos of me anywhere. No mention of another life, another family, another wife living 3 states away. I sat there in Robert's office chair, holding evidence that my entire adult life had been a lie. I wasn't just competing with another woman for my husband's attention. I was competing with another wife for my right to exist. The folder contained more horrors. Joint bank accounts with Patricia, a mortgage application for a house in Portland with both their names on it, insurance policies listing her as the primary beneficiary, and me nowhere to be found. For 28 years, I'd believed I was Robert's wife. It turned out I was just his other wife. And judging by the financial documents, Patricia wasn't the other woman. I was. In that moment, sitting surrounded by evidence of Robert's double life, I realized that everything I'd questioned about my identity, my marriage, and my reality had been absolutely correct. I wasn't losing my mind. I was just married to a man who'd been living 2 completely separate lives for nearly 3 decades. I sat in Robert's chair for 2 hours, staring at the evidence spread across his desk, waiting for the familiar wave of self-doubt to wash over me. The voice in my head that had been whispering, "Maybe you're overreacting, and maybe there's an explanation," was silent now. For the first time in months, my mind felt crystal clear. The confusion, the second-guessing, the constant feeling that I was losing my grip on reality, all of that lifted like fog burning off in morning sunlight. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't a suspicious wife imagining problems that didn't exist. I was a victim of an elaborate decades-long deception. The difference was profound. Instead of feeling small and confused, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Righteous anger. Not the desperate emotional anger that makes you scream and throw things, but something much more powerful. A cold, focused fury that sharpened my thinking instead of clouding it. I looked at Patricia's Facebook photos again, but this time I wasn't seeing them as evidence of my inadequacy. I was seeing them as evidence of Patricia's innocence. She wasn't some scheming homewrecker trying to steal my husband. She was another victim just like me. She'd been building a life with a man she believed belonged entirely to her, just as I had. The Valentine's Day post that had initially devastated me. 27 years with my best friend and the love of my life now filled me with something unexpected. Sympathy. Patricia loved Robert completely, the same way I had. She probably made him coffee every morning, worried when he was late coming home from work, and planned their future together with the same devotion I'd shown. She had no idea she was sharing him. I pulled out a notebook and started writing down everything I knew. Not the emotional mess of hurt feelings and betrayal, but facts, dates, account numbers, addresses. For the first time in my adult life, I was investigating Robert instead of trusting him blindly. Marriage to me. June 12, 1996. Marriage to Patricia. August 15, 1998. Portland address, 2847 Maple Street, joint accounts with Patricia, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, life insurance beneficiary, Patricia Chen, primary, children listed as secondary. My name appeared on nothing recent. The pattern became obvious once I laid it out clearly. Robert had been methodically transferring our shared life to Patricia over the years. Accounts that used to have my name were being replaced with accounts that only had hers. I was being systematically erased from his financial world, not through divorce or separation, but through careful, deliberate substitution. I realized something else. Robert's monthly trips to Portland weren't business meetings. They were trips home to his other home, with his other wife, living his other life. The life where he probably complained about having to travel for work all the time, missing Patricia, the same way I'd missed him. The cruelest part was how good he'd gotten at compartmentalizing. When he was with me, he was completely present, loving, attentive, a devoted husband I'd fallen in love with. But when he was with Patricia, I simply didn't exist in his mind. Neither of us was getting half a man. We were each getting a complete husband who just happened to live a double life. But here's what Robert had underestimated. He'd made the mistake of underestimating me for so long that he'd gotten careless. All those dismissive comments about my inability to understand complex financial matters had blinded him to the fact that I was actually quite capable of understanding them. I'd been managing money successfully for 28 years. I just hadn't been managing all of his money. For the first time since finding that credit card statement, I smiled. Not a happy smile, but something harder, something determined. Robert thought he could gaslight me into believing I was incompetent, paranoid, and unworthy of full disclosure about our financial life. He thought he could make me small enough to overlook. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and started taking photos of every document in that file cabinet. If Robert wanted to play games with financial records and hidden accounts, he was about to discover that his simple housewife knew exactly how to play that game. The difference was I was going to play it better than he did, and I was going to win. Over the next week, while Robert continued his mysterious absence, I became someone I'd never been before, strategic. Every morning, I woke up with a clear mission. I wasn't the confused, emotional wife anymore. I was a woman gathering evidence, building a case, and preparing for war. The first thing I did was consult with an attorney. But not just any attorney. I researched lawyers who specialized in complex financial cases and bigamy. I found Margaret Harrison, a divorce attorney with 23 years of experience, who had handled several high-profile cases involving financial fraud within marriages. Mrs. Williams, she said during our consultation, what you're describing isn't just adultery or financial infidelity. If your husband is legally married to both you and this Patricia Chen, he's committed bigamy, which is a felony in this state. We're not just talking about divorce proceedings, we're talking about criminal charges. I felt a chill of satisfaction hearing those words. Criminal charges. Mrs. Harrison explained my legal position. The good news is that because your marriage came first, you're his legal wife. Patricia's marriage to him is invalid under the law. The bad news is that he's been systematically transferring marital assets to an illegal spouse, which is both theft and fraud. I hired her on the spot. While Robert was gone, I methodically photographed and documented everything in his office, but I was careful. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it. I wanted him to feel secure, unsuspicious. Let him think his secret was still safe. I opened my own bank account at a completely different bank, not one of the 3 institutions where Robert apparently conducted his various financial lives. I started diverting small amounts of money from our household budget, $20 here, $50 there. Money he'd never missed because he'd stopped paying attention to what I spent on groceries and household expenses. Within a week, I had saved $800. Not much, but enough to give me options. The most important step was gathering intelligence about Patricia. I wasn't going to approach her yet. That would tip off Robert that his secret was blown. But I needed to understand her situation completely. I spent hours studying her social media, learning her routine, her work schedule, her life patterns. Patricia Chen taught third grade at Westside Elementary School. She posted pictures of her classroom, her students' artwork, and school events. She seemed like a genuinely nice person, patient, caring, completely devoted to Robert, and apparently unaware that she was living a lie. I learned that she and Robert owned a house together at 2847 Maple Street in Portland. Through public records, I discovered they'd bought it in 2003, 5 years after their illegal marriage. The mortgage was in both their names, which meant Robert had committed loan fraud by claiming to be unmarried when he applied. I also discovered something that made my blood boil. Patricia had co-signed on business loans for Robert's insurance agency. She was financially responsible for debts she probably didn't even fully understand, just like I'd been for years. The woman was being used just as much as I was. I called Robert's insurance company, Meridian Insurance, and spoke with Human Resources, claiming I was updating beneficiary information for our family policies. What I learned was illuminating. Robert had listed Patricia as his emergency contact and beneficiary on his work accounts, but he'd never removed me from our original policies. He was double-dipping on everything, collecting benefits as a married man from both relationships. I documented everything in a spreadsheet that would have made my old accounting professor proud. Account numbers, dates, amounts, addresses, phone numbers. I was building a case so airtight that Robert wouldn't be able to gaslight his way out of it. But the most crucial part of my preparation was emotional. Every day I practiced staying calm, controlled, unreadable. I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagining how Robert would try to manipulate me when he returned, planning my responses in advance. I wasn't going to be the hysterical wife he could dismiss. I wasn't going to cry or scream or beg for explanations. I was going to be the woman with evidence, documentation, and legal representation. When Robert finally called on day 7 to say he was coming home to work things out, I was ready for him. "That sounds good, honey," I said sweetly into the phone. "I've missed you." What I didn't tell him was that I'd missed the old Robert, the one I'd thought I was married to. The Robert who was coming home was a stranger, and I was prepared to treat him like one. He had no idea that while he'd been gone, his devoted wife had transformed into his most dangerous opponent. Robert returned home on a Thursday evening, carrying the same overnight bag he'd left with a week earlier. He walked through the front door with that familiar smile, the one that had charmed me for 28 years, and called out, "Honey, I'm home," as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed, and I could see it in his face within the first 5 minutes. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, giving him the same warm hug I'd given him thousands of times before. "How was your trip?" "Trip?" Robert looked momentarily confused, then recovered. "Oh, you mean my time away? It was good. Gave me some perspective. I think we both said some things we didn't mean during our argument." I nodded sympathetically, playing the role of the apologetic wife perfectly. "You're probably right. I've had time to think, too." What I didn't tell him was that I'd spent the past week building a case that could send him to prison. The first sign that our power dynamic had shifted came during dinner. Robert started explaining his absence, weaving an elaborate story about staying at a hotel to clear his head and figure out how to be a better husband. He watched my face carefully as he spoke, the way someone watches for cracks in a dam. "I realize I've been dismissive of your concerns about our finances," he said, cutting into the pot roast I'd prepared, his favorite meal. "Maybe we should sit down this weekend and go through everything together." 6 months ago, this offer would have thrilled me. Now, I recognized it for what it was: panic. Robert was offering me access to our finances because he was afraid of what I might have discovered on my own. "That sounds wonderful," I said sweetly. "I'd love to understand more about those business accounts you mentioned." Robert's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Business accounts? You know, the ones from Pacific Trust Bank and Chase. The accounts you said I couldn't understand because they involved complex financial strategies." I watched something flicker behind Robert's ESA calculation, a quick assessment of how much I might know. He was trying to figure out if I was still the naive wife he could manipulate with condescending explanations, or if I'd become something more dangerous. "Write those accounts," he said carefully. "We can definitely review those." But I could see sweat forming at his hairline despite the air conditioning. The second shift happened when Robert's phone rang during dinner. He'd always answered his phone at the table before. Work calls, family calls, it never mattered. But this time he glanced at the screen and declined the call immediately. "Not important," he said, but his hand shook slightly as he put the phone face down on the table. It rang again, 5 minutes later. This time, I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen before he flipped it over. "Patricia, honey, if it's work, you should take it," I said innocently. "I understand that business calls can't wait." "It's not work," Robert said quickly. Too quickly. "Just someone trying to sell me extended car warranty coverage." You know how persistent those people are. Patricia was trying to reach her husband, probably wondering why he hadn't come home as expected. And Robert couldn't answer because he was sitting across from his other wife, pretending to be a reformed husband who'd never betrayed anyone. The most telling moment came when Robert went to check his email after dinner. I watched him from the kitchen as he sat at his computer, and I could see his shoulders tense as he scrolled through messages. His phone kept buzzing with texts he couldn't answer, emails he couldn't respond to, a whole other life demanding his attention while he tried to manage the crisis in this one. For 28 years, Robert had maintained his double life through careful compartmentalization and meticulous timing, but now that I was paying attention, really paying attention, his juggling act was becoming visible. He was a man trying to be in 2 places at once, answer to 2 different wives, maintain 2 different versions of himself. And he was failing. When he came back to the living room, Robert looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. It was the exhaustion of someone whose lies had become too complex to maintain effortlessly. "Everything okay?" I asked, looking up from my book with genuine seeming concern. "Fine," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Just some work issues I need to sort out." I nodded and went back to my book, but inside I was smiling. Robert was discovering what I'd learned during his absence. The truth has a power all its own. My silence wasn't submission anymore. It was strategy. My calmness wasn't ignorance. It was control. He was beginning to realize that something fundamental had changed between us, but he couldn't figure out exactly what, and that uncertainty was eating him alive. The hunter had become the hunted, and Robert was starting to feel what it was like to be preyed. The confrontation came on Saturday morning, and I chose the timing deliberately. Robert was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and newspaper, looking relaxed for the first time since he'd returned home. He'd convinced himself that he'd successfully managed the crisis, that his apologetic husband routine had worked its magic again. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I walked into the kitchen carrying a manila folder, the same type of folder I'd used for 28 years to organize our household paperwork. Nothing threatening about it. Just Diane with her filing system, as predictable as sunrise. "Morning, honey," I said, setting the folder on the table next to his coffee cup. "Remember how you said we should go through our finances together this weekend?" Robert looked up from his newspaper with a smile. "Of course, I think it's a great idea for us to be more transparent about everything." Transparent, the irony of that word coming from his mouth almost made me laugh. "Wonderful," I said, sitting down across from him. "I've prepared some questions to help us get organized." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, a printout of Patricia Chen's Facebook page with the Valentine's Day photo prominently displayed. Robert's face in the picture was unmistakably clear, his arm around a woman who definitely wasn't me. Robert's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "What is this?" he whispered. "This is Patricia Chen," I said calmly, my voice as level as if I were discussing grocery lists. "Your wife." Robert set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "Diane, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I interrupted gently. "You're very good at explanations. But before you start, Let me show you what else I found. I laid out the documents one by one, like dealing cards in a poker game, where I held all the aces: the marriage certificate, the joint bank accounts, the insurance policies, the mortgage documents, the life insurance beneficiary forms, listing Patricia as his primary beneficiary. With each document, Robert seemed to shrink smaller in his chair. 27 years, I said, reading from Patricia's Facebook post. She says, "You've been together for 27 years. That's interesting because we've been married for 28, which means you married Patricia exactly 1 year after you married me." Robert opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized during my week of preparation. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Pacific Trust Bank, customer service. "This is Jennifer. How can I help you?" "Hi, Jennifer," I said, looking directly at Robert while I spoke. "I'm calling about my husband's credit card account. I'd like to cancel it, but I understand only the primary cardholder can do that." "That's correct, ma'am." "What's the account holder's name?" "Robert Williams." "And you are?" "I'm his wife," I said, watching Robert's face turn gray. There was a pause on the line. "Ma'am, I'm showing that the primary cardholder on this account is indeed Robert Williams, but the authorized user listed as his spouse is Patricia Chen." "Are you Patricia?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm Diane Williams. I'm also his wife." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but our records show Patricia Chen as Mr. Williams' spouse on this account." "So am I," I said, my eyes never leaving Robert's face. The silence on the phone line stretched out until Jennifer finally said, "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion here. Perhaps you should speak with your husband about this account." "I'm speaking with him right now," I said. "Thank you for your help." I hung up and placed the phone gently on the table. Robert's hands were trembling so badly he couldn't hold his newspaper anymore. "Diane, please let me explain." "Explain what, exactly?" I asked, my voice still impossibly calm. "Explain how you've been married to two women for 27 years. Explain how you've been collecting insurance benefits from both relationships. Explain how you've been building a retirement fund with her money while telling me I'm too stupid to understand complex financial matters." I leaned forward slightly. "Or maybe you'd like to explain how Patricia has no idea that the man she's loved for 27 years has another wife living 3 states away." Robert put his head in his hands. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "It just got complicated. I never meant for it to happen this way." "Complicated," I repeated, tasting the word. "Robert, this isn't complicated. This is bigamy. This is fraud. This is 27 years of lies so extensive that you've built 2 complete lives." I gathered the documents back into the folder, my movements calm and deliberate. "The only thing that's complicated," I said, standing up from the table, "is figuring out which one of us you actually love. But I suppose that doesn't matter anymore, does it?" Robert sat there in stunned silence as I walked toward the kitchen door. "By the way," I said, pausing in the doorway, "I've already spoken with an attorney. Bigamy is a felony in this state. You might want to call a lawyer yourself." I left him sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by the wreckage of the life he'd built on lies. What I hadn't told Robert during our kitchen confrontation was that I'd already made a phone call that would change everything. 3 days earlier, while he was still adjusting to being caught, I had done something that even my attorney hadn't suggested yet. I had called Patricia. The conversation was one of the hardest things I'd ever done in my life. Imagine having to tell a woman that the man she's loved for 27 years, the man she calls her husband, is already married to someone else. Imagine having to destroy someone's entire world because yours has been destroyed, too. I found her work number at Westside Elementary and called during her lunch break when I knew she'd be able to talk privately. "Patricia Chen speaking." She answered in a warm, professional voice that reminded me of myself. Confident, capable, completely unaware that her life was about to implode. "Miss Chen, my name is Diane Williams. I need to speak with you about Robert Williams. There was a pause. Are you calling about Robert's insurance business? Because if this is a work matter, you should probably call his office directly. No, I said gently. I'm calling because Robert is my husband and I believe he may also be yours. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. Then, I heard a sharp intake of breath. Excuse me. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything: the credit card statements, the locked file cabinet, the marriage certificate dated 1 year after mine. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief or pain. When I finished, she was crying. I don't understand, she whispered. We have a house together. We have joint bank accounts. He's listed as my emergency contact at work. We've been planning our retirement together. How is this possible? I know, I said, tears running down my own face. I've been asking myself the same questions. What happened next surprised me. Instead of hanging up or getting angry with me for destroying her world, Patricia got angry at the right person. That son of a, she said, her teacher's professional composure cracking completely. 27 years. 27 years of my life. We stayed on the phone for 2 hours. Patricia had questions, hundreds of them, and I had most of the answers. She wanted to know about our house, our financial arrangements, and whether Robert had ever mentioned her name. I told her everything I knew, and she shared details about their life in Portland that filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed. The most devastating revelation came when Patricia told me about their finances. Not only had Robert been stealing from our joint accounts to fund his Portland life, but he'd also been using Patricia's excellent credit score to secure loans and credit cards that he'd been hiding from both of us. He took out a $50,000 home equity loan against our house. 6 months ago, Patricia said, her voice hollow. He said it was for investment opportunities, but I never saw where that money went. I knew where it went. It went to pay for his secret life with me. By the end of our conversation, Patricia and I had made a decision that would have seemed impossible that morning. We were going to work together. I've already contacted a divorce attorney, I told her. But Patricia, this isn't just about divorce anymore. This is criminal fraud. Bigamy is a felony, and he's been using both of our financial information to commit additional crimes. What do you think we should do? She asked. I think we should file charges against him together, both criminal and civil. He's stolen from both of us, lied to both of us, and used both of us to build a life that benefits only him. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. You know what the worst part is? He always told me he had to travel so much for work. He said he hated being away from home. The whole time he was going home, just not the home I thought we shared. 3 days later, Patricia drove from Portland to meet with my attorney. Seeing her in person was surreal. She looked exactly like her photos, kind-faced and gentle. The type of woman who probably baked cookies for her students and remembered everyone's birthday. She was nothing like the homewrecker I'd imagined when I first discovered Robert's secret. She was just another woman who'd trusted the wrong man. Together, we filed criminal charges for bigamy, fraud, and theft. We also reported him to his insurance company for filing false information on his employment benefits. The company immediately suspended him pending investigation, but the final twist of justice came from an unexpected source. When Patricia and I started untangling Robert's financial web, we discovered that he'd been committing tax fraud for years, claiming different filing statuses with the IRS, depending on which life was more financially advantageous in any given year. The IRS doesn't find tax fraud nearly as forgivable as broken hearts do. Robert went from having 2 wives and 2 complete lives to having no wives, no job, no benefits, and federal charges pending against him. Sometimes justice doesn't just knock on your door. Sometimes it kicks the door down and brings friends. 6 months later, as Robert's legal troubles continued to mount and his world systematically collapsed, my daughter Melissa called with a request that broke my heart. Mom, I know this is hard, but I think you should consider talking to Dad. I was sitting in my new apartment, a bright, airy space that I'd chosen entirely for myself, with white walls and plants everywhere, and absolutely no traces of the life I'd shared with Robert. It was the first place that had ever been completely mine, and I loved every square inch of it. Honey, we've talked about this, I said gently, setting down my coffee cup. Your father made choices that can't be undone with a conversation. I know, Mom, but he's really struggling. He lost his job. He's facing criminal charges, and both his marriages are over. I think he's learned his lesson. Melissa was 32 years old, a successful marketing manager with her own apartment and her own life. But in that moment, she sounded like a little girl, trying to fix her broken family. It was heartbreaking to hear the hope in her voice, the belief that somehow we could all go back to being the happy family she remembered from her childhood. Melissa, sweetheart, your father didn't just make a mistake. He didn't have an affair, or forget to pay a bill. He lived an entirely separate life for 27 years. He had another wife, another house, another complete existence that he hid from us. But Mom, Melissa's voice cracked. What about forgiveness? What about working through problems together? You always taught me that marriage means not giving up on each other. That hurt more than almost anything Robert had done to me. My own daughter was using my values, the principles I'd raised her with, to convince me to accept the unacceptable. I did teach you that, I said carefully, and I still believe in working through problems. But honey, some things can't be fixed with therapy and good intentions. Your father didn't just cheat on me. He erased my legal existence for 28 years. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I tried to protect Melissa from the worst details of Robert's betrayal. But she was an adult, and she deserved to understand the magnitude of what her father had done. Melissa, your father listed Patricia as his beneficiary on his life insurance policies. If he had died, I would have gotten nothing. He put her name on bank accounts that contained money from our household budget. He used her credit to secure loans that I would have been responsible for paying if things had gone differently. I paused, letting that sink in. He didn't just hide another relationship from me. He systematically replaced me with another woman in every legal and financial aspect of his life. I wasn't just his secret. I was being erased. Melissa was quiet for a long moment. I didn't realize it was that complicated. It's not complicated, sweetheart. It's criminal. That's why he's facing felony charges. That's why Patricia and I had 2 hire attorneys. This isn't a marriage problem. It's a legal problem. But he's still my dad, Melissa whispered, and I could hear her crying. And you're still my mom. I just want my family back. My heart broke for her. Melissa was grieving the loss of her family, just as much as I was, but she was also grieving the loss of her hero. Robert had been a wonderful father, attentive, loving, present for every school play and soccer game. She'd grown up believing her parents had a perfect marriage, and now she was discovering that half of her childhood memories were built on lies. Oh honey, I know you do. And I want you to know that whatever relationship you choose to have with your father is completely up to you. He's your dad, and that will never change. But I can't pretend that what he did to me, to us, is something that can be forgiven and forgotten. So, you're just giving up after 28 years. You're just walking away. The question stung because it came from a place of genuine pain. But it also showed me how much Melissa still didn't understand about what had happened. Melissa, I'm not giving up. I'm choosing myself. For 28 years, I gave everything I had to a man who was giving half of himself to me and half to someone else. I forgave his dismissiveness, his secrecy, his condescension, because I thought I was supporting a marriage worth saving. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city street below, where people were going about their normal lives, lives that weren't built on fundamental lies. But I wasn't supporting a marriage, sweetheart. I was supporting an elaborate deception. And I'm 62 years old. I don't have another 28 years to waste on someone who has proven that my happiness, my security, and my legal rights don't matter to him. I just thought maybe if you two could talk. We did talk, honey. We talked for 28 years. The difference is now I know he was lying the entire time." Melissa sniffled. "Will you at least think about it?" "I've thought about it every day for 6 months," I said gently. "And every day I wake up grateful that I'm not sharing my life with someone who could look me in the eye for nearly 3 decades while living a completely different life behind my back." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but a deep, settled calm that came from finally living in complete truth. I didn't need Robert's approval anymore. I didn't need his explanations, and I definitely didn't need his forgiveness for refusing to accept the unacceptable. For the first time in my adult life, I was enough for myself. 1 year later, I sat in my lawyer's office holding the final divorce decree that officially ended my 28-year marriage to Robert Williams. The document was surprisingly thin for something that represented nearly 3 decades of my life. Just a few pages of legal language that dissolved what I'd once believed was an unbreakable bond. Mrs. Harrison slid another document across her mahogany desk. "The criminal case is also resolved," she said with satisfaction. "Robert pled guilty to bigamy, fraud, and tax evasion. He'll serve 18 months, followed by 3 years of probation and full financial restitution to both you and Patricia." I nodded, feeling oddly calm about it all. The woman who had sat in this same chair a year ago, clutching mysterious credit card statements and questioning her own sanity, felt like a stranger to me. "Now," Mrs. Harrison continued, opening another folder, "Patricia asked me to give you this." It was a handwritten letter on pale blue stationery. Patricia's teacher's handwriting was neat and careful, the kind you'd see on a classroom whiteboard. "Dear Diane, I wanted you to know that I'm doing well. I sold the Portland house and moved to Seattle to be closer to my sister. I'm teaching 4th grade now at a wonderful school, and for the first time in 27 years, I'm living a life that's completely my own. I've started a support group for women who've experienced financial fraud within their marriages. Would you believe there are more of us than we realized? We meet twice a month, and we're helping each other rebuild not just our finances, but our ability to trust our own instincts. I hope you're finding peace in your new life. Thank you for having the courage to call me that day. If you hadn't spoken up, we both might have spent the rest of our lives living in Robert's carefully constructed lies. Your friend in survival, Patricia. P.S. I kept one photo from my time with Robert, our wedding picture. Not because I miss him, but because I want to remember the woman I was before I learned to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's deception. She deserved better than what she got." I smiled as I folded the letter back into its envelope. Patricia had found her strength, too. And like me, she was using it to help other women avoid the traps we'd fallen into. 6 months ago, I'd done something that would have terrified the old Diane. I'd started my own financial consulting business for women going through divorce. My first client was a 45-year-old teacher whose husband had been hiding credit cards for 10 years. My second was a sick woman whose husband had been forging her signature on business loan documents. It turned out that my years of managing household finances, combined with my crash course in uncovering financial deception, had given me skills that other women desperately needed. Women who'd been told they were too emotional or too simple to understand money matters. Women who'd been systematically excluded from their own financial lives by people who claimed to love them. Every time I helped a woman discover hidden accounts or decode deliberately confusing financial documents, I felt a piece of my old self healing. Last week I received a phone call that brought everything full circle. A woman named Sarah, 48 years old, had found mysterious credit card statements, and her husband was giving her the same dismissive explanations Robert had given me. "I feel like I'm going crazy," she said, her voice shaking. "Everyone tells me I should trust my husband, but something feels wrong." "You're not going crazy," I told her, "and your instincts are probably right. Let's find out together." The most surprising thing about rebuilding my life wasn't how hard it was how Natural, it felt. For 28 years, I'd been trying to fit myself into the shape Robert needed me to be. Grateful, unquestioning, small enough not to threaten his carefully balanced double life. Now, at 63, I was finally discovering who I actually was when I wasn't performing the role of the perfect wife. I was stronger than I'd known. I was smarter than I'd been allowed to believe. And I was valuable in ways that had nothing to do with how well I could support someone else's dreams while sacrificing my own. This morning, I looked at an old photo of myself from before I discovered Robert's betrayal. The woman in that picture was smiling, but there was something hollow in her eyes, something resigned. She was happy, but it was the happiness of someone who'd learned not to ask too many questions or expect too much. The woman I see in the mirror now has different eyes. They're clearer, more direct, unafraid to see uncomfortable truths. She's not bitter. Bitterness would give Robert too much power over her future. She's simply awake. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the 28 years I spent with Robert, if I feel like I wasted my life, but I don't see it that way. Those years taught me what I didn't want, what I wouldn't accept, and what I was capable of surviving. They taught me that I was strong enough to rebuild everything from scratch at 62.